The Dialectics of Envy. Envy is the most deceitful of human emotions, not only because it is the most contemptible, but because it is composed, essentially, of an insoluble conflict between self-loathing and the longing for self-valorization. In such a way, the divided soul speaks outwardly with the voice of pride and inwardly with the voice of disdain, never achieving that unity of intention and tone that signifies sincerity. To my knowledge, the only openly envious character in universal literature is Rameau's nephew, from Diderot's work, a caricature too exaggerated to be real. Even Dostoevsky's underground man only expresses himself on paper because he believes he won't be read. We confess to hatred, humiliation, fear, jealousy, sadness, and greed. Envy, never. Admitted envy would nullify itself in the act, transforming into open competition or resigned surrender. Envy is the only sentiment that thrives on its own concealment. Man becomes envious when he inwardly gives up on the goods he coveted, secretly believing he doesn't deserve them. What hurts him is not the lack of goods, but the lack of merit. Hence his compulsion to devalue those goods, to destroy them or replace them with miserable simulacra, pretending to consider them more valuable than the originals. It is precisely in these dissimulations that envy reveals itself most clearly. There are many forms of dissimulation, but essential, primordial envy targets spiritual goods because they are more abstract and intangible, more capable of arousing in the envious person that sense of irremediable exclusion that turns him into a condemned soul in life. Material wealth and worldly power are never as distant, as incomprehensible, as Abel's friendship with God, which drives Cain to despair, or the mysterious gift of creative genius, which humiliates mediocre intellects even when they succeed socially and economically. Behind ordinary envy, there is always spiritual envy. However, the motives behind spiritual envy change with the times. The modern era, as Lionel Trilling explains in Beyond Culture, 1964, is the first in which many men aspire to great achievements in the arts and, in their frustration, form a dispossessed class, a proletariat of the spirit. For new motives, new dissimulations arise. The proletariat of the spirit is, as Otto Maria Carpos already observed, in Purgatory's Ashes, 1943, the revolutionary class par excellence. Since the French Revolution, mass ideological movements have always recruited the bulk of their leaders from the ranks of resentful semi-intellectuals. Removed from manual labor by the education they received, separated from achievement in literature and the arts by their endemic mediocrity, what was left for them? Rebellion. However, a revolt in the name of ineptitude would self-demoralize in the act. The only one who confessed it, with suicidal candor, was precisely the nephew of Rameau. As if warned by this cruel caricature, the others realized that a noble pretext was necessary for camouflage. The poor and oppressed served that purpose. The ease with which every revolutionary sheds tears of pity for them while fighting against the establishment, only to oppress them as soon as they rise to power, can only be explained by the fact that it was not their material suffering that moved them, but only their own psychic suffering. The rights of the poor are the hallucinogenic potion with which the activist intellectual intoxicates themselves with illusions about the motives of their conduct. And it is the very inner drama of spiritual envy that gives their discourse that hypnotic emotional intensity that W. B. Yeats noted in The Apostles of the Worst, see The Second Coming, and The Leaders of the Crowd, in Michael Robartes and the Dancer, 1921. No authentic sentiment is expressed with comparable fury to that of hysterical staging. By irony, what gave rise to the grand guignol of modern revolutions was not exclusion, but inclusion. It was when the doors of higher cultural activities were opened to the masses of the middle and lower classes that, inevitably, the number of frustrated intellectuals multiplied by millions. The rebellion of the masses, referred to by José Ortega y Gasset, the revolt of the masses, 1928, consisted precisely of this, not the ascent of the poor to higher culture, but the concomitant impossibility of democratizing genius. The resulting envy generated hatred towards the very goods recently acquired, which seemed even more inaccessible to souls as they became more democratized in the world. Hence the general outcry against the elite culture, precisely at the moment when it was no longer the privilege of the elite. Ortega, unjustly yet understandably, was accused of being elitist. But Erich Hofer, a worker elevated by his own merit to the level of a great intellectual, also wrote insightful pages about the psychology of activists, pseudo-intellectual chatterboxes full of pretense. Living sterile and useless lives, they lack self-confidence and self-respect, and yearn for the illusion of weight and importance. The Ordeal of Change, 1952. Therefore, readers, do not be surprised when you see citizens from the middle and upper classes, graduates of the most expensive universities, leading the social movements. If these movements were genuinely for the poor, they would be satisfied with the fulfillment of their nominal demands, a piece of land, a house, tools for work. But the void in the heart of the activist intellectual, the black hole of spiritual envy, is as deep as the abyss of hell. Not even the whole world can fill it. That is why the reasonable demand for the simplest goods of life, the initial hope of the masses being led, always ends up expanding, initiated by the leaders, into the mad requirement for a total transformation of reality, a revolutionary mutation of the world. And in the chaos of revolution, the hopes of the poor always end up being sacrificed for the glory of the activist intellectuals. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. This text was taken from the article, The Dialectics of Envy, by Olavo de Carvalho, written in 2003.